Welcome back. And now for our closing keynote for the first day. I'd like to welcome David Flynn, CGA board member and Regional Vice President for Canada, South and Central America for IGT, to introduce our closing keynote panel. David, over to you.
Good day, everyone. My name is David Flynn, and I'm the Regional Vice President of IGT Canada. IGT is proud to support the 2021 Virtual Canadian Gaming Summit as a gold level sponsor. As many of you are aware, IGT has a significant presence in Canada, and we are very proud and thankful for all of our customer relationships across the country. And as we emerge from COVID, we're going to have more opportunities to work together. Cashless wagering, sports betting, and of course, omni-channel content. Which brings me to Powerbucks. Powerbucks has paid out 28 jackpots of more than $1 million for a total of more than $35 million paid out to Canadians. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's closing keynote session, the AGCO update on Ontario's iGaming model. Today's roundtable participants include Tom Muggan, the Chief Executive Officer and Registrar at the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. With the AGCO since 2006, Tom works with the board of the AGCO and its executive team overseeing and regulating the alcohol, horse racing, recreational cannabis retail, and commercial casino, lottery, and charitable gaming sectors. Martha Otten is the Executive Director of the iGaming Ontario project, leading the establishment of the proposed iGaming subsidiary of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, which will be responsible for conducting and managing Ontario's expanded internet gaming market. Paul Burns is the President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. He is a seasoned public affairs and gaming practitioner with more than 20 years' experience in the private and public sectors. Paul was instrumental in establishing the CGA in 2005, recognizing the need for a national trade association to advance the evolution of Canada's gaming industry. On behalf of today's presenters and the entire team at IGT, enjoy today's keynote session. We also hope you enjoy all of the great session content that the summit has assembled today and for tomorrow, as well as the 2 virtual networking receptions that will occur as final events in both days. Thank you for being with us. Enjoy today's keynote session and the 2021 Canadian Gaming Summit. Please stay tuned after the closing keynote for the virtual reception from 3:45 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. Thanks very much and enjoy your time.
And thank you, David. I appreciate the introduction. I'd like to give our thanks from the AGCO to Carrie Cormos and the CGA board, to Paul Burns, and to Amanda Brewer. We really appreciate being invited to be part of this year's virtual summit. I've seldom known the Ontario gaming industry to be as busy as it has been over the past year, and all during a shutdown of land-based operations, no less. I know we have lots of work to do and even more to talk about over the next couple of days of the summit. But before we get to our presentation and your questions, I'll hand things over to Martha for a few words. Martha?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to Susan, our engineer, for actually, despite all of Tom and my best efforts, made the technology work for us today. Very pleased to be here today, and I look forward to the time when we can meet in person again. The pandemic, I don't have to tell you, has created many hardships for the gaming industry, but I'm hopeful better days are ahead of us. We're very excited to be talking to you today about plans underway to expand the internet gaming market in Ontario. A competitive iGaming market in Ontario will foster a collaborative and regulated relationship with private sector operators while adhering to the applicable laws. This is a major shift, and we believe it will provide an opportunity for the gaming industry, government, and the betting public. First, a brief overview of today's agenda. We'll speak to the current iGaming market, our move to an open and competitive market, provide a bit of background information on the AGCO and the new conduct and manage subsidiary, and a proposed timeline. So back to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Martha. I'll keep going. I see that our slides may not be keeping up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'll get right into the next slide. Ontarians have been gambling online on unregulated sites for years, if not since the birth of the internet. The government entered this space with the AGCO and OLG working together on the 2015 launch of OLG.ca. This is currently the only registered option for online gaming in Ontario. The current market size of the unregulated market is estimated at between $500 million and $1 billion, with some 1 million or more players participating. It's thought that the OLG.ca captures approximately 20% of the market, leaving about 80% of online gambling activity in Ontario not regulated. These gambling sites, therefore, are not operating underneath the AGCO's regulatory framework and the registrar's standards. Key areas of regulatory focus, such as consumer protections that ensure prevention of underage access, safe and responsible play, and game integrity, are not overseen. Moreover, operator compliance with anti-money laundering rules and regulations and system security cannot be verified. And these sites also do not contribute any money to the Ontario government, which translates to lost revenue for government priorities like healthcare, education, social programs, and even post-pandemic recovery. The very reasons for which gaming was introduced in the province more than 2 decades ago. During our many discussions, we've been very pleased to see the large number of operators and suppliers that have shown interest in being part of the regulated market in the province. So I'll turn things back over to you, Martha, to run through Canada's criminal code and a few other slides.
Thanks, Tom. Sorry. Ontario understands that the tax and license approach to online gaming regulation and revenue collection is common practice in jurisdictions outside of Canada with established online gaming markets. That's not the case here in Ontario. The Criminal Code of Canada expressly prohibits gambling with certain exceptions, such as where gambling is conducted and managed by the province, a requirement that necessitates higher level of involvement by the province than a tax and license scheme for participation. Instead, interested operators will be required to register with the AGCO and enter into a commercial agreement with the iGaming subsidiary to participate in Ontario's new iGaming market. The commercial agreements will enable private operators to offer their games directly to consumers within a regulated framework in exchange for a defined revenue share paid to the province via the lottery subsidiary. Components and drafting language of the commercial contract are still under consideration, but will include provisions to demonstrate that the lottery subsidiary has appropriate operational control for the conduct and management requirements of the Criminal Code. These commercial agreements may include, but are not limited to, the following requirements: revenue collection and reconciliation, anti-money laundering requirements, requirements around the collection and verification of player registration and game performance data, and responsible gambling measures. We plan on sharing more details relating to the commercial contracts in the coming weeks. Expanding the internet gaming in the province is a government priority. In the November 2020 budget, the government announced that in addition to regulating Ontario's existing gaming market, the AGCO would also regulate the new iGaming framework. Further, they announced that a subsidiary of the AGCO would be established to conduct and manage the new iGaming market in accordance with the law. The OLG will continue to conduct and manage OLG.ca. By regulation, Ontario plans to establish an independent subsidiary of the AGCO, which will be responsible for conducting and managing the iGaming undertaken by eligible private sector operators on behalf of the province. I raise that because the subsidiary does not exist in law as at this time. It is a proposed subsidiary. The AGCO registrar's regulatory role will remain entirely separate from the AGCO subsidiary's commercial role in conducting and managing the iGaming market. To ensure the market is open and accessible to a variety of interested registrants and is driven by market and consumer demand, the province does not intend to place any cap or limits on the number of operators that can register in the market. The design of the new iGaming framework in the province aims to create a competitive market and reflect consumer preference while ensuring that appropriate consumer protections are in place. In establishing this new market, the Government of Ontario has set out clear public policy objectives to include the following: consumer choice to respond to consumer preferences, consumer protection to ensure safe and responsible play and game integrity and compliance with the applicable laws, legal market growth to address unregulated iGaming market and capture new provincial revenues, and reduce red tape to enable innovation and speed to market. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Martha. There are multiple government parties involved in launching this new market, as you can see represented here, including work being done as well with the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs. This initiative truly is a multi-agency effort across many facets of government. The ministries of the Attorney General and Finance have retained Brigitte Sand as the province's commercial project lead, or the CPL. As many of you appreciate, Brigitte is the former director of the Danish Gaming Authority, bringing extensive experience to inform and guide Ontario's approach to building its regulated internet gaming market. Both Martha and I, the team at the AGCO, and folks at the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of the Attorney General work very closely with Brigitte through all aspects of our iGaming work. Strong stakeholder relationships are critical to the success of the AGCO. Indeed, they always have been. If you've worked with us in any of the sectors we regulate, you'll appreciate that we believe the path to balanced and well-regulated industries are through strong and constructive relationships. And Amanda, if you could just advance the slide one, I'd be appreciative. Thank you. Stakeholder relationships are one of our cornerstones as we continually strive to earn the reputation as a modern regulator. So I appreciate the many internet gaming meetings and conversations we've had over the past several years with the OLG, government, regulators, operators, suppliers, charities, those with advice to offer on harm reduction, and many industry associations, as we draw on your experiences to inform the design of our regulatory framework, both what's worked and the lessons learned. Our timeline to the day one opening of a regulated market is ambitious. Indeed, we developed the path to launch with your advice. So I appreciate that you've been the recipient of our outreach, thoughtfully responding to our many consultation documents, and all with very, very tight turnaround times. The province has deliberately taken a consultative engagement approach to ensure all interested parties have an opportunity to be heard and to contribute to the establishment of Ontario's regulated market. In March, the Ministry of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Finance published a discussion paper and sought feedback on a broad range of topics from all interested stakeholders. The commercial project lead, Brigitte, followed with stakeholder engagements with operators and industry partners throughout the spring. These government engagements had two streams. One focused on topics such as revenue sharing, funding distribution, and product offerings, and the other was specific to First Nations. The AGCO has also launched a series of engagements on the key technical components of the iGaming framework, including on the registrar standards and market participant eligibility. And a third AGCO consultation paper will be coming later in June, asking interested parties about our regulatory compliance model. We're also keeping a close eye on Federal Bill C-218 concerning single event sports wagering. You may have noted that our Chief Operating Officer, Dave Phillips, appeared before the Senate committee last Friday to offer comments and to answer questions. If passed and enacted, we appreciate that this will be an important new offering for Ontario. So you can expect we'll also engage you on our regulatory approach with that as well. Martha will also be conducting engagements specific to the work of the subsidiary, including aspects of the commercial contract as she referenced a moment ago. Martha, over to you to talk more about the relationships between the subsidiary and the regulator.
Sure. And, you know, Tom and I spend a whole lot of our time explaining the different roles within the Canadian gaming context, and I'm sure it's not unique to us. We have the advantage in designing this model that we work closely together. I am, in fact, have been a long-term member of the AGCO staff, so we are working collaboratively in bringing this model together. And we have, as you can see here, complementary mandates in ensuring that iGaming in Ontario is conducted in the public interest. Having said that, there are some differences in our mandates, and a great deal of attention will be paid to setting up the structures and process to guard against any real or perceived conflicts between the two organizations. For example, it's anticipated that the subsidiary will be governed by its own board of directors, which in turn is overseen by the AGCO's board. The subsidiary will be responsible for revenue collection, market insights, industry programs such as those for responsible gambling and anti-money laundering, and for building public awareness of this new regulated market that is coming to the province. The AGCO will maintain its role as regulator, creating standards ensuring honesty and integrity of licensed participants in the market, and ensuring their compliance with laws, regulations, and standards. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Martha. We'll talk now a little bit about the regulatory and the subsidiary principles. So I'll begin with the regulatory side of things. In standing up our regulatory program, the AGCO has been benchmarking its standards, our technology, and critical program components against leading jurisdictions in both Europe and the United States. These design principles guide our work. As a regulator that focuses on outcomes and risk, our approach is to provide operators with flexibility to design their control frameworks. And with that flexibility, hand in glove goes accountability. We tailor our compliance approach and our activities accordingly. Like in the other lines of business we regulate, we're not looking to be heavy-handed and overly prescriptive in our regulation, rather establishing standards and processes that focus really on what truly matters, such as player protections, responsible gambling, minimizing unlawful activity, privacy protection, the protection of underage play, and data and system security. Our program is being established based on an initial assessment of the potential risks. It will evolve through the collection and analysis of evidence and ongoing information gathering. Those risks will continuously be assessed and our regulatory program adapted to address them. With this opportunity to serve an entirely new set of customers, we are developing our processes using customer-centered design principles. As an example, we're developing customer journey maps to visualize the entire customer journey so that we can best design our services with a true end-to-end view of customers' needs and interactions. This includes understanding when and how registrants will be interacting with the subsidiary to ensure that experience is as seamless as possible. All of this, of course, is being done to establish high standards of service and avoid needlessly burdening operators with additional red tape. Martha, for a word or two on the subsidiary principles?
Sure. So similar to the regulatory side, the subsidiary has been working under a number of principles in designing the model. So first, our prime goal here is converting the unregulated market. We feel that a successful C&M model will enable commercially viable iGaming industry that is attractive to both players and operators, and that we can only protect Ontarians that meet the government objectives and meet government objectives if we convert the unregulated market, both the operators and the players, to the regulated market. Second, and similar to what we saw on Tom's slide, a customer-centered design that will be tailored to business and operating realities of the global marketplace. Seamless experience, again, that you heard from Tom, between the regulator and the conduct and manager. A business enterprise mindset, and this is where we perhaps differ a bit from the regulatory side in that we are going to be structured to capture maximum revenue and be a lean and nimble organization that's focused on its core services. We are building long-term strategies that may evolve, and in fact we expect will evolve over the time that we are involved with this market, meeting legislative and legal requirements and market facilitation. The conduct and manage subsidiary will monitor important attributes of the model across key performance indicators and recommend tactics to optimize the model. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you. So Martha and I we'll close off with some discussion on timelines. We get a lot of questions about timelines. The roadmap to launch in late 2021. It's available on our website at agco.ca. Over the past 20 minutes or so, we've discussed many of the steps we've taken so far. We've completed our engagement on regulatory standards and are currently in the middle of our engagement on eligibility. We've also begun accepting applications from independent testing labs to become registered gaming-related suppliers that can be engaged by further registrants. These labs will offer us greater capacity to ensure the integrity of the games being authorized for Ontario meet our regulatory standards. Having a number of these labs approved will also help ensure operators speed to market. Our engagement activities will continue throughout the spring and summer as well, with consultations on our regulatory compliance program coming next. And we'll be looping back to update you on our work as we consider your input when developing the registrar standards and eligibility approach prior to us accepting applications for registration. Martha, to close off?
Sure. And as Tom has mentioned, and I myself mentioned this, we plan to make key elements of the draft commercial contract available to interested operators in the coming weeks, with an eye to opening up that registration and contract engagement later in the summer, early fall. Operators who wish to be part of the first group into the market at its launch will sign their contracts with the subsidiary in the fall, which will then allow us time to configure systems and establish data exchange requirements. So look for that to come up in the near future. And that's it for me.
Thanks,
Great.
folks. We're pleased to take your questions now as we see them spooling up, and Amanda Brewer will facilitate that. Thanks, Amanda.
Great, thank you. We do have some questions waiting for you, and I guess I'll throw it open to both of you, and whoever wants to speak first can go ahead. So the first is from James Kilsby from Gambling Compliance, Vixio Gambling Compliance. Hello to James. And he's asking, to what extent does the AGCO expect to adhere to the initial policy proposals made in its recent draft standards and discussion paper on eligibility and regulatory standards? So as a reminder, the AGCO has released 2 separate documents, and the feedback on eligibility is due on Monday. Does the AGCO expect to implement as proposed, or taking into account the feedback that's been received, do you anticipate releasing another version of the draft standards before they're finalized?
Thank you. Thanks, James. A good question. I just kind of harken back to that slide of a few moments ago around stakeholder engagement. Incredibly important to us. Incredibly important to us that you have a voice and that you be heard, and that we also are transparent and we loop back with you as we consider your input. So all of the conversations that we've had, the input to these formal requests for consultation and information are all taken extremely seriously. As you can see, I'll raise an example in the eligibility paper. We presented an option for registration as an example, leveraging the current Ontario Regulation 7812. Well, we want to hear back from you what that means. And I've seen some of the input, and there's a lot of great ideas that are coming back, a lot of great experience from other jurisdictions that is being shared with us on what works and how Ontario might be able to tweak or nudge things to make them even better here. So we fully expect to, we are looking at all of that information and fully expect to make some changes based upon your input.
Great. From Brad Romano at BCLC, he's wondering if potential licensees will be required to close existing accounts or prevent new accounts from being opened by Canadians or Ontarians with any other licensee brands or subsidiaries that are based outside of Canada. So in other words, will Canadian or Ontarian players be forced through the licensees, through the potential licensees Ontario portal, even if they've been gaming with the licensee in the past?
Yeah. Thanks. A good question as well. Let me deal with that one in a couple of ways. And I'll harken back again to the consultation paper on eligibility, and I'll draw some words from it. The AGCO expects registrants to comply with all applicable laws. In addition to this general expectation, registrants will be required to specifically attest that their operations in the Ontario regulated market comply with the Criminal Code of Canada. Earlier in that eligibility document, I think there's another important statement there that bears repeating here to address the question. applicants will be required at eligibility, so early on, so that we can get some assurances that you're starting to work with our standards and that you understand the regulatory framework in Ontario. At eligibility, applicants will have to confirm that prior to going live in Ontario's regulated market, the applicant will stop offering gaming products and services that are not regulated by the AGCO to individuals located in Ontario. There's also some other language that parallels that says the applicant will abide by the registrar standards for iGaming, including that goods, services, and technology deployed by or provided to the applicant will comply with the registrar standards for iGaming. So I hope that addresses your question. Go back through that document and give it a quick another read, and pay attention to some of those words, particularly the sections around attestations and operations elsewhere outside of Ontario.
So this might be a question that Martha can answer. So when it comes time to sign the contracts and get the licenses awarded, we know that registration may open up sometime later this summer, early this fall, and you'll have some operators coming in with vast experience and with licenses in all kinds of jurisdictions, and you'll have some newer companies coming in, maybe seeking their first license in Ontario, or maybe they've got a license in only one other jurisdiction. So will this be sort of a, as you process, people will be allowed to get their licenses and get into the market, or do you anticipate trying to kind of deal with that initial swath and then everyone gets released on day one of the market opening?
So I know, Amanda, you said this is a question for me, but I might direct it to Tom, because I think you're talking about the regulatory registration process here. But I would say a couple things from the subsidiaries side is, one of the things we're very interested in is actually how many applications and how many operators we will have on day one. But we will be working in partnership with the regulator, because there is, as we've talked about, there's the two steps. So there's the registration with the AGCO, but then there's also the commercial contracts that need to be signed with the subsidiary. So we will not, or at least our planning right now is not to finalize the commercial contracts until the registration has been achieved through the AGCO, which is not to say that we won't be working simultaneously on both the documents in order to move this forward as quickly as possible. But I think just sort of the bigger part of this question, Tom, is more around the registration process.
So just before Tom answers, so I guess, Martha, the commercial contract will have to be signed and in place before the registration will be finalized then?
No, actually the flip, that we won't sign and finalize the contract until the registration has been achieved.
Okay. Just trying to figure out the chicken and the egg on that one.
Yeah. We've had many conversations around that, but that, I believe, is where we've landed.
So I guess over to you, Tom, on the other side of that, which is sort of with the glut of expected registrations, are you going to kind of do them in batches, or is it, you're going to try and hold everyone back so that it's a open market with as many entrants as possible on day one?
It'll be an open market with as many entrants as possible on day one. Absolutely. We're well positioned to be able to handle a surge capacity in applications. Indeed, the approach that we've made around eligibility, which will include both the registration side of things as well as the technical testing and technical assurance side of things, has been structured for speed to market. And what we hope that model will, operators and suppliers will benefit from that model over the longer term as well, because we believe it's a nimble model that will allow operators to bring product to market quickly to reflect consumer demands, consumer choice, and just the evolution of the market, period. That being said, when we do open up registration, we have got a fairly large a team. As when you read my bio, you get an appreciation for the 4 letters in our name. We've got a cannabis, we've got cannabis work, we've got horse racing work, we've got liquor work, and it's going to be very busy over the next couple of weeks and months as the pandemic, I hope, allows us to reopen the economy in stages. That being said, we've got some elasticity within our workforce that we can meet demand. So we'll start shifting resources around the organization, because folks are skilled in all 4 of these sectors. So we'll be able to address all of the disclosure that comes in, enterprise disclosure, the personal disclosure, once we, of course, make final all of our requirements. So we're going to have, if folks are able to come in, they've got a good operating history in other jurisdictions, for which we'll have some third-party reliance as we've structured memorandums of understanding with many jurisdictions and has been part of our operating framework now for decades. We're going to get everybody up and running for day one. I would only say this to folks, if you'd like to help yourself a little bit, is that complexity can make things more difficult and slow things down. So as you think about your operations and opcos in Ontario and how you're going to be structuring things, your ownership group, your officers, your directors, your shareholders, if those are different than your operations elsewhere, that will cause just additional touch by us. But we do all of this on a risk basis. It is not a cookie cutter. It is not mandatory interviews. It's interview by default. So we'll assess the information coming in, risk assess, take a look at what we really need to make decisions, talk to those other jurisdictions that we work with, and get you through the system and up and going for the first day launch.
So turning to sort of as we try to open the market up, and we'll be trying to get as many existing offshore operators into compliance as possible, is there something that those that have come in and have gone through the due diligence and have received their license and registration in the province, is there going to be some sort of seal of approval they'll be able to put on their website so that customers know that they are dealing with a company that is licensed in Ontario? This is kind of touching on the enforcement question, which I know on another panel that Stan Cho and Paul Burns were on, they certainly got that question asked of them, to differentiate, between those that are not yet into compliance and those that have gone through the process.
So I think the easy answer to
Maybe
that
I'll
is
begin,
yes.
Martha, and I'll talk about the regulatory side, and then okay.
I think we might be on a bit of a mic delay here. Sorry about that, Tom. But we are definitely in discussions about whether or how to indicate on the website. Similar, you will have seen that the cannabis stores, the authorized cannabis stores in the province have a seal. So something to indicate. And I also see one of the major functions of this new subsidiary is that market awareness. So to let the public know what sites are part of this regulated scheme and what parts are not. It's I can say that I have two sons who are young men who I think were quite surprised to find out that the sites that they are gaming on are not part of the regulated system right now, and I don't think that's unique, and passing out that awareness. So definitely this is part of our thinking. There you go, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just add just a small bit from the regulatory side, this is not an unfamiliar concept to us. If you have watching some sports and Princess Margaret lottery comes up, you'll see at the bottom licensed by AGCO. So that being the case, we will be working with Martha and I will be working together in our teams to be able to put up a list of registered entities, places that are safe to go, and we'll be augmenting that with communications, lots of communications and transparency out to Ontarians about the sites that are registered, and reminding them that these sites have met rigorous standards. Indeed, they've complied with the registrar's standards, that they're safe to play on, and that all of the consumer protections are in there, including anti-money laundering and responsible gambling measures. So yes, we'll be very, very transparent about who is registered in the marketplace.
So it looks like it will be a very busy summer for the two of you and your respective agencies. There will be no sleep yet until we get the market opened. So I guess the next big release, you mentioned the draft commercial contract, Martha, but also I guess the compliance set of standards, or the compliance document, will be also released in the next coming weeks as well. So I guess the signal to anyone watching and listening and wondering is you are still very much in a consultative process right now. And I guess that's my question to you, is that would be an important message, just to communicate that there's still more documentation to come, and that decisions have not been finalized yet.
Yeah, I think that's a
Martha, do you want to lead off?
Sure, I think that's a fair statement, Amanda. That, as Tom has said, it is not just with this initiative, but it's our preferred way of working, is working with the industry to ensure success. I spoke about one of our principles being that business enterprise mindset, and so we want to make sure that we are designing a system within the parameters of certainly the criminal code and FinTrack legislation, but one that allows the operators to succeed, and we feel that the operators and others involved in the gaming sector have a lot to offer. Just if I can clarify, in the commercial contract, there'll be parts that will come out. It won't be we won't be talking about it in its entirety, because some thinking is further advanced than others. So perhaps starting with a bit of a menu of what we think will be contained in the contract, with some details greater in certain other areas. But to your point, don't see this as the end of the conversations that we want to have.
Tom, did you have anything to add?
And Amanda, I'll just add in a bit on the regulatory side. Yeah, thank you. We will, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and you saw in the timeline, we'll be coming out with our consultation paper on compliance and the compliance approach. That will likely be in your inboxes in about a week and a half's time. So we've got it in pretty much close to final draft form, just looking over it one more time. So look for that in the very, very near future. We also owe you answers back on standards and eligibility. So that work on standards is full on, with a large team working through that and all of your input. And we'll be getting back to you mid to late summer on that. And on eligibility, which will be closing, I think, on the 16th, if I recall, we'll be back to you late summer with information about that, so you understand exactly what the eligibility framework is going to be, both technically and for registration. And as I think you saw in the timeline there, we're targeting something around early September, very late summer, very early fall, to open up registration. So we want to get all those two pieces of standards and eligibility back to you in time for that window to open up. It is very much a work in progress. It's all hands on deck at the AGCO, but not just us. At the Ministry of Finance, at the Ministry of the Attorney General, working with Indigenous Affairs, even working with Ministry of Health on responsible gambling discussions. So as you can imagine, this is an Ontario-wide initiative, not just one that Martha and I are the face of today, but there are many people that are participating in this, and the decisions, we work collaboratively across government. So we're going to get those answers back to you as quickly as can, but be rest assured, we're targeting for a late 2021 launch and go live.
So what has surprised both of you most about this process so far?
I actually like that question. Quite often I've been asked what's the biggest challenge, which can be hard to narrow down.
I can only imagine what keeps you up at night right now, so I wasn't going to ask you that question.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's just the complexity and making this all happen, and maybe that's the biggest surprise and the biggest challenge as well going forward. As Tom said, we're working very collaboratively with the industry, and I hope that the audience here today recognizes that, as well as with the other government decision makers. But it is a global industry. There are all sorts of movements within the industry, and it's complex. I think that's also part of what makes this a very interesting and exciting file, and I would say overwhelmingly really excited about this initiative, and we both are working with teams who are so enthusiastic. Amanda, you said you're probably not getting any bit of sleep. I'm a little worried about summer vacation, so I can say that. So I hesitate to say that there isn't a day where I learn something new on this file.
How about you, Tom?
Yeah, and Martha and I are preaching to the converted today. It's incredibly complex. It's complicated, but that's what makes it so very interesting. is the decision making is fast, the input and opinion is there for us to consider, to talk to others with different points of view. So it's been exciting work. It's collaborative, certainly fast paced. The timelines are aggressive. I would say from my perspective, looking inward to the organization, though, what's exciting, there is a palpable excitement in the AGCO amongst folks, our staff. It's new and different work. It's thoughtful work. It's incredibly engaging. It runs right across our organization. Every part of our organization is involved, from the board right through. Almost all staff members have touched this or are touching it in one way or another, covering for somebody who's been taken off and put on. So chipping in to make sure that this thing happens. But there's also palpable excitement around opportunity in the organization. These are difficult days in the pandemic, right? And we're very aware that many industries are suffering, businesses are closing, people's dreams are being dashed and tested, particularly in the hospitality and the services sector. We are busy, and we'll be adding positions, and Martha will be standing up an independent shop, for which there's no shortage of interest from the regulatory side looking at Martha's positions and her opportunities. But that's great. Morale is high in the organization. People are engaged. It's exciting work. We're in growth mode. Actually, Amanda, notwithstanding the complexity of this project and the enormity of it, it's incredibly exciting in the organization, and everybody's 100% engaged.
Fabulous. Now, I know we're going to be wrapping up our session here, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask, and it's not for you to circle any dates on the calendars for those listening, but I know that between yourselves and the Ministry of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Finance, there are still conversations and discussions going on, because there are still some outstanding big decisions that we don't have final answers on yet, and that will really inform, I guess, the decision of operators to come in and submit applications into Ontario. So for things like, international or shared liquidity and our tax rate or the fee structure, or, any of those other really big points, do you have a sense of when those decisions may start getting released? Obviously before registration opens, but, if we're looking at a late summer, early fall opening, open for business sign, then do we expect that the industry may be getting some communication back from either the Ministry of Finance or yourself over the July-August period on those outstanding decisions?
I think based upon where I sit today, that's a reasonable assumption to make. Obviously, some of those decisions are going to be necessary for folks to consider the marketplace. Some of those answers will come back in the standards. Some of them will come back in the eligibility documentation. And then there are some larger ones that I don't think are necessary for us to launch this market. Liquidity may be a key business determinant, as an example, for individuals and companies to consider the marketplace. But I think the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of the Attorney General consultation paper was fairly clear on where they were sitting on a starting point, but with a view to reconsidering and expanding. But a decision like liquidity will not hold us up from launching. It may affect channelization, and I think that's a very relevant and key point. But so there are some that are connected to launch, Amanda, in my view, and there are some that are connected to the success of us achieving our public policy objective, what a lot of folks will call channelization.
Now, I will put the two of you on the spot in our final minute here and say C218 has come back to the Senate, third and final reading tomorrow. What odds would you give it of success at this point?
Oh, I'm like you. I've got both my fingers crossed, Amanda. Let's say 90%.
Oh, I like your odds. I like the way you think, Martha. How about you, Tom?
Boy, I don't know if the registrar should be talking about odds, but I would say I give it a very, very high chance. At least, from talking with folks that seem in the know, that are kind of reading the tea leaves and having conversations. To me, it's trending very, very positively. And maybe on that point, just kind of getting serious again a little bit, I want to give folks out there every assurance that, Martha and I are already working on this, and if it is successful, we can't afford not to work on it. If it is successful, we'll be having some significant conversations in the government about our readiness to be able to deliver this as part of this initiative as well. So again, all hands on deck with this other piece of new business that may be coming.
Yes, I know that Paul Burns, in his testimony last week in the Senate, did assure everyone that if we are successful in changing the criminal code across Canada, regulators, lottery corporations, operators will be ready and willing and able to get things moving very quickly on this front. So I hope we have the opportunity to put everyone to that test. Well, I have no other questions coming in, and at this point in time, because I know we're still in consultation phase, so it's not about trying to land on concrete answers right now. It's more to just reassure people that the process is ongoing, and we are still tracking towards the hopeful launch of the market end of this year or early part of next year. So I will turn it over to you for any final words.
Just a thank you again to you, Amanda, Paul, and others for giving us this opportunity. And as we've said throughout, this is not the end of the conversation, that we will continue to engage and absolutely are working towards end of this year launch and looking forward to it.
And my thanks to all that have been participating in the process. We've had lots of meetings, lots of conversations. We've had the benefit of discussions with you. Martha, it seems like ages ago we were in ICE meeting with people at Canada House and talking in a pre-pandemic era. Can't imagine, but it really began to take shape then in earnest, and it has continued since then. So thank you to everybody out there for your engagement with us, for your constructive input, and for working with us, as Amanda, as you say, as we work through this process here in consultation and drive towards decision making. So very much appreciated, and it's been a tremendous initiative so far.
Great. Thank you very much for being with us today. We do appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.